I decided to take Dwight up on the offer of a little boost here. I think this is the first time I've done this here. I just love being up here and looking out at your faces. There's many people here that are very dear to us, and it's just good to be with you. I want to. This message is probably going to sound a little bit rough around the edges, a little bit raw, because I want to talk to you about what our life is right now, what our life has been over the last couple of years, and about how Jesus has been using Scripture to encourage me in the middle of it and what I think he's teaching, and how he is moving us toward him and toward what he has for us through his word. So, I'm a little bit tired. I have been traveling for 38 hours since I left my house in Asunción. This is about the longest version of this trip that I've done. But it was good. It was one of those uneventful series of flights, which is always what you want. In fact, I even got boosted into a nicer seat on the last one from Chicago. Yesterday, I had a 12-hour layover in Panama, which is a little long. But I took, some of you know Thad Roller. He and I share a love of birds, and I got a recommendation from him on the name of a guide by the name of Kilo Campos, who's one of the top birders in Panama. And I got in touch with him, and he took me to a place called Cerro Azul, and we spent the whole day birding. And it was fantastic. It was a really special day. I saw 48 new species for me, which is just in one day, that's like birder's paradise. So that was really fun. Friday, I finished a class, a 9-month class. This is why Lisette and the boys came a couple of weeks ago. Lucas graduated from high school 2 weeks ago, and a couple days later, they flew to the States so that the boys could be a part of the camps, and I'm so glad they were able to participate in that. But I stayed for another couple weeks to finish off teaching language to 3 students who have been with me for 9 months, an American couple that has come to work with First Nations people, and a German man of Gypsy Serbian descent, and who his family immigrated to Germany. They found Jesus there. Jesus found them, transformed their lives. Fantastic story, and a really fun class, super motivated, super energetic. And I just loved being able to invest in them by teaching them Guarani. But birds have been a big help to me over the last couple of years especially. They've really encouraged me in what's been a difficult time. I've gone out to look at birds and walking through the forest and wetlands and grasslands, and it just, there's something about that recharges your spirit. And we kind of thought, at least I did, that we were kind of coming out of what's been a really hard period of ministry for us. Then this week, we got hit again there in the missionary community in Paraguay. Dear friends of ours, South African missionaries, Greg and Vonnie Cameron, who were also Guarani students, have a son, 14 years old, friend of Joe's. They played games together online after school a lot of days. Ben Cameron from way up in Canindeyú in northern Paraguay. And on Friday, he came home from school with a little bit of a cough. And his cough got a little worse over the weekend. Monday, he started to run a fever. Tuesday, his cough got worse, his fever got worse. In the evening, late night, he had a hard time breathing. They took him to the hospital there in Curuguatú. And they couldn't get his oxygen saturation above 80, so they decided they needed to intubate. Greg told me on Thursday that was one of the worst parts of the whole process, knowing that that was a pretty serious thing and having to make that decision to let them intubate in this city in northern Paraguay where healthcare it's okay, And so they intubated. There were no ventilators available in the town, and so they bagged him all the way to Asunción in an ambulance, got to the hospital, and found a hospital in Asunción that had a ventilator available. Most of them are in use right now. Took him to the San Sebastián hospital, got them there Wednesday morning, and Wednesday afternoon he was gone. And so I missed the memorial service yesterday afternoon because I was in Paraguay in Panama looking at birds. Just a couple of weeks after we came back to the States last time for our home assignment in 2019, we woke up early in the morning to the terrible news that our friends, also former language students that work closely with Greg and Vonnie, they're not with the same organization. Greg and Vonnie are with SIM. These are an independent family, Peter and Evie Ratcliffe, that we heard the news that the day before they had been driving at night in the Chaco in western Paraguay, came upon a truck that was stopped, parked in the road, and ran into the back of it. And most of them were pretty seriously injured, but they lost their oldest daughter, Emily, 15 years old, also a friend of our kids, in that very violent accident. And so we were here in the U.S. at the time and weren't able to share with them in their grief. And then last September, other dear friends of ours that we've known since I can be able to look over at you, since our early days in Paraguay, even before we got married. Our boys grew up together. They also have 3 boys. Their oldest son, this is the Floyds, Tony and Jean Floyd, he's from Kentucky, she's from Tennessee, SIM missionaries. Their oldest son had come to college in the States. He had just gotten married to another missionary kid from Paraguay, whose parents were also our students. And 2 months later, he took his life in Michigan. That was last fall. The missionary kid community in Paraguay is suffering, and it hurts my heart. I'm sorry, guys. It's not supposed to be like this for kids. So all of these things affect a very small, close-knit missionary community very, very painfully. We love each other. We support each other. It was so heartening to see how the SIM community, as soon as they heard about Ben this week, immediately just converged on Asunción to be around Greg and Vonnie and support them. And they were there for them, and I was able to be there a little bit with them. Last April, some of you know, April 1st, we had to go to an event at the boys' school. In the evening when we came back, we found that our house had been broken into while we were gone, and significant amount of valuables taken, laptops, cameras, binoculars, cash. That was a pretty hard blow, hard thing to deal with as a family, and you as a church gathered around us and encouraged us and helped us to come back from that. And God gave us real peace and a sense of his care for us in the days and months following that. We've had family sickness, a number of issues over the last year, some of them very bewildering and kind of scary, and sickness in our extended family. You all know about my mom. You know about, some of you know about Lisette's dad, who came very close to death with complications from diabetes, advanced complications from diabetes. We've had setbacks and challenges in ministry that have been the worst in all of our time in Paraguay. things that I can't really talk about, which makes it worse, makes it harder, but really hard things. And it's just been a hard time. And I told Rose and Pastor Dwight, this evening that I was going to talk about difficult things, and I kind of felt silly about it, sheepish, vulnerable, and they confirmed to me what I already know, which is that this is the group to share this with, because we know of your love and care for us. But the Word of God has been so meaningful, and several times it's just hit me in the face, taking my breath away. Just recently, we've been going through the book of Mark together with our missionary family there in our Wednesday prayer meetings, and we read Mark chapter 6. In Mark chapter 6, we have the story of Jesus' feeding of the 5,000, this amazing miracle. They find themselves far from civilization, far from available food, and Jesus is moved with compassion. And he decides to serve them. He decides to bless them. And he invites his disciples in to that miracle. He invites them to join him, to participate in that amazing thing that he does. And he multiplies what's available, and he feeds 5,000 people, and then afterwards he tells his disciples to go around and pick up the leftovers, and there are 12 baskets remaining. And then after that, in verse 45, we have this really interesting story, and this was what really knocked me back on my heels. Chapter 6 of Mark, verse 45. Immediately, it's a good Mark word, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. So he sends the disciples on a mission, gives them a job to do, and he goes to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars. Because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them. It's almost comical, isn't it? Jesus goes out for a stroll on the lake, and he's about to walk past his disciples. Hey, guys, just out for a walk. But when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out, because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." I don't know if it's intentional. Maybe Dr. Oswald can tell me afterward. When he says, "It is I," in Greek he says, "egoimi." That's the same as he said to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law when he said, "Before Moses was, egoimi, I am." So he said to his disciples, "Don't be afraid. I am. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them. Walk is over. Get in the boat. The wind died down. They were completely amazed. And here's the verse that has just been going around in my head over and over, verse 52. For they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. Mark comments a lot in his book about the response to Jesus' miracles, people being amazed, people being astonished. But here he's not approving of their amazement. Their hearts were hardened, and that was the cause of their amazement. I don't understand about the loaves either. It's a bewildering verse a little bit because it doesn't tell you, sort of the what next, the then of the if clause. They didn't understand. And it's almost like Mark is assuming that his readers do. In the next chapter, he tells, it's almost like a replay of the episode. Not the next chapter, the 2 chapters later. Jesus feeds the 4,000, so it's a different scene, but very similar details. Jesus has compassion. And this time, it's almost like he slows down the action and aims it at the disciples. He says to the disciples in 8:2, "Hey, disciples, I have compassion for these people. Watch. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. Are you paying attention? If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance." And the disciples say, "But where in this remote place can anybody get enough bread?" And then again, we have the same thing. "How many loaves do you have?" And they participate. He invites them into this miracle, and then he sends them out to get the leftovers, and they gather up 7 baskets. And then we have that bit about the boat again. They get into a boat, and Jesus warns them about the yeast of the Pharisees. And the disciples are confused. They don't know what's going on, and they go, "It's because we don't have bread." And he says, "No, listen, guys, it's not. Why are you talking about not having bread? Don't you see? Don't you understand? Are your hearts hardened?" There's the word again. "Do you have eyes but fail to see?" And this is what he tells the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who seem to miss the whole point of the law and the prophets. "Do you have ears and fail to hear? And don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets were picked up?" 12, they said. "And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls did you pick up?" They said, 7. And he goes, "Do you still not understand? Guys, do you get it yet? Have you figured this out?" I think that what he longs for his disciples to understand is that he's enough. That he's enough, and that his enoughness is abundant. It's overflowingly enough. There's a progression here in the boat story, in the walking on the water story. There's a hardness of heart that then causes a lack of faith, that then causes a lack of understanding, which leads to amazement. Amazement in not a good way. Amazement in a, I still don't get who this guy is. I still don't get what he's about. What it doesn't lead to, I think, is contrast. Matthew tells us the same story, but he puts a detail in, an important bit of the story that Mark doesn't tell us. Matthew tells us the story, and he says that when Peter saw Jesus walking out there, he said, "Lord, invite me to come out with you." And Jesus does. Now, I think, even though there's that moment of rebuke where Jesus says, "Why did you doubt?" I think that that's exactly what Jesus wanted. I think that Jesus wanted his disciples to join him on the water. I think that there's this invitation to his disciples to join him, to be doing what he's doing, to participate with him. I think that when he feeds the 5,000 and when he feeds the 4,000, and he so intentionally brings his disciples into that, he's saying that he wants his people to participate in his enoughness. He wants us to join him in his abundant enoughness. And he wants us to be agents of his enoughness. So I think that when Peter joins him in this miracle, I think that makes Jesus happy. And then another thing happens that I think makes Jesus happy, which is that Peter recognizes something really key in that moment, and he says, "My Lord and my God." and the other disciples bow down and worship, and we don't have that happening in the Mark story, so I don't really understand exactly what is going on with the difference between the Matthew story and the Mark story, but I think that Mark is putting his finger on the fact that this amazement is connected to their doubt, and you know that doubt is always the greatest, doubt in the sense of unbelief. Doubt, not trusting in Jesus. I don't think doubt in the sense of maybe not having everything absolutely certain. But the lack of belief is always what's condemned in the Bible. And so this heart issue becomes a faith issue, which then becomes a mind issue, which then leads to actions. And the actions are predicated on a lack of faith, on a lack of understanding of who Jesus is and what he's about. They don't understand about the loaves. I don't think that Jesus condemns my sadness. I don't think that he condemns my bewilderment and my lack of complete clarity about the future. I think what he takes issue with is my lack of faith and hardness of heart that makes my sadness tend to become bitterness and anger, and my bewilderment become doubt and despair. And I tell you, quite honestly, that has been a distinct trend lately. And I think right in the middle of this, where we are right now, I think what Jesus is calling us to is to reaffirm what we know to be true. I really loved how we started the service tonight. I needed to make that declaration of what I knew to be true. That proclamation. And in that psalm is the understanding that proclamation is for the nations. That when he invites us into his abundant enoughness, and he invites us to be agents of his enoughness, that he sends us to the nations, because all around us, and the nations include Jessamine County, by the way, all around us, there's need, and there's lostness, and there's hurt that calls for the compassion of Jesus. And if we're not people that live in and understand the overwhelming enoughness of Jesus, then how can we be the agents that he needs us to be to the world that needs to know that? We're going to be here in Wilmore for 3 weeks. I'm looking forward to a little bit of a time of rest. And I'd like to ask you all to pray for us as a family, to pray for the missionary community in Paraguay. I don't understand. All of us, this is our conversation as we talk about this. What is going on? What on earth? The Camerons are in the middle of it right now, and so if you think of Greg and Bonnie, please pray for them. And for their son, Caleb, their oldest son, and their youngest daughter, Galilee. They're bewildered. They're saying, what on earth? What is going on? Would you pray for them? Would you pray for all of us in the missionary community in Paraguay and around the world? This is not just a struggle that we're facing in Paraguay. I know you're hearing these stories. I don't know what's going on right now, but I believe, because of my worldview, that God is at work, that something is happening, that when we don't see it, something is going on behind the scenes. I don't think it's coincidental that the Ratcliffes who lost Emily, and the Camerons who lost Ben, and the Boschers, whose daughter was Addie, the wife of Daniel, whom we lost, are all involved in First Nations ministry to the least reached communities of Paraguay, people that are immersed in their traditional religions that go back thousands of years, and where spirit worship is very much a part of their culture. I think this is territory that Jesus is challenging and taking back, and I don't think the enemy likes that. Now, I don't know how this jives with your theology. I don't know how it jives with mine. I'm still figuring this out. So if you have any wisdom, write me an email. But I think something is going on, and I think something is about to happen. I think that Jesus is at work, and I want to be a part of it because I believe he's called us and invited us in. And I want to be faithful. I don't want to miss it. But it's scary. It's scary to take your kids into that. It's scary to have your family there. It's scary to be a part. But it's the time now for us to restate, to proclaim confidently that Jesus is enough, that we believe in his promises, that we rest on his word, and that we know his word to be true, and that we know his call. I have never been as sure of any personal direction from God at any point in my life as I was about God's call to Paraguay. It was very clear to me. And I don't have a sense at this point that he's changed that call. I feel like we would need something pretty clear. And so, as far as we know, we're going back to Paraguay and we're continuing to equip people for First Nations ministry. Gabe Ernst just graduated from Asbury last year, a year ago, and he's joined us on the field since January, and he's going to be working in First Nations ministry. I'm going to be starting soon after we get back to teach him Guarani. He's a young man with a lot of promise, and I'd ask you to pray for him because he knows that he's walking into a battle. And I would ask you to pray for our entire team that we would be faithful, that we would be obedient, and that God would use us to be agents of his abundant enoughness. And I pray the same for you, my brothers and sisters at Wilmore Free Methodist, that you would be powerful, truthful, shining agents of the one who sent you into the dark world. God bless you all. Thank you for your prayers.